Beyonce is a billionaire. Say it once and let the number land. Because in December 2025, Forbes officially made it a fact, dropping her name into a club so small it has only 5 members in the history of recorded music. 5. Out of every artist who ever sang into a microphone, ever filled a stadium, ever sat at number 1, only 5 have crossed the 10-figure line. Beyonce is one of them. And the internet, predictably, is losing its mind celebrating the crown. But before you clap for the coronation, listen closely, because the story everyone is telling right now is a lie by omission. It is not the wrong story. It is a story with the most important part surgically removed. The talent is real. The stage presence is real. The catalog is legendary. And none of those things are the reason she is a billionaire tonight. The reason is something almost nobody in the celebration is willing to say out loud, because saying it forces the entire music industry to look in the mirror and see what it has been doing to artists for 50 years. Here is the part they leave out. Some of the biggest songs Beyonce ever recorded. The songs that put her face on posters. The songs that made teenage girls memorize choreography in their bedrooms. The songs that turned Destiny's Child into one of the best-selling groups of an entire generation. She does not own them. She has never owned them. The master recordings for her first 3 solo albums and the entire Destiny's Child catalog stacked behind them do not live inside her company. They live inside a major label. And for a decade of her career, every time one of those records played on a radio, in a store, in a car, in a commercial, the biggest slice of the money it generated was flowing back to a company whose logo was not hers. That is where the story most people repeat quietly breaks down. Because everyone assumes the woman on the cover keeps the fortune the cover creates. She does not. She never did. Not in the beginning. And then, without a press conference, without a headline, without a war, Beyonce did something that almost no artist at her level had ever done. She rebuilt the machine. Quietly. Piece by piece. Until the machine that used to rent her voice belonged to her. This is not a story about a singer. This is a story about a structural blueprint underneath the fame, and the person who built it before anyone was watching. It is a story about contracts, holding companies, licensing structures, and one very specific decision that separates the artists whose careers become dynasties from the artists whose careers become footnotes. If you want to understand how the same person can sell 60 million records and still not be a billionaire, and then sell fewer records and suddenly become one, you have to stop looking at her voice and start looking at the paperwork behind it. Because that is where the real music is written. Start at the beginning, because the beginning explains everything. When Beyonce first arrived in the music business, the contract she signed looked like a dream. To a teenager staring at a stage, it was a dream. It was a deal with Columbia Records, part of the Sony family, one of the most powerful label systems ever assembled. The label agreed to finance her records, market them, ship them, promote them, put them on radio, put them on television, and put them in the hands of every human on the planet who might one day scream her lyrics back at her. In return, Beyonce did what artists have done since the invention of vinyl. She traded ownership of the recording for access to the machine that would sell it. On paper, it looked generous. In practice, it was a lease. Because the master, understand this, is not a copy of a song. The master is the original recorded version, the source file, the artifact, the asset. Whoever owns the master decides how it is sold, how it is streamed, how it is licensed to films and shows and commercials, and whoever owns the master collects the largest share of everything that flows from it, effectively forever. A song ages. A master appreciates. And when the artist does not own it, the artist does not own the future the song creates. She owns a paycheck for singing it. That is the deal that sat underneath Dangerously in Love. It sat underneath Birthday. It sat underneath I Am Sasha Fierce. It sat underneath every Destiny's Child record before that. Enormous albums. Multi-platinum, generation-defining, culture-shifting albums. She wrote on them, performed on them, poured years of her life into them. And the master rights to those recordings, the asset that compounds decade after decade, did not belong to her. Now translate what that looks like in dollars, because the numbers are almost surreal. Destiny's Child alone moved more than 60 million records worldwide. Stack her early solo work on top of that, and you are looking at one of the largest and most durable recorded catalogs of the last 25 years, a catalog that has continued generating royalties across every technology shift the industry has thrown at it. CDs, downloads, streaming, sync placements, everything. Under a traditional label deal, an artist historically kept only a small sliver of the master royalties, something in the range of 10 to 20% after the label recouped its costs. The label kept the rest, and more importantly, the label kept the asset. The artist was paid like a contractor on a job site. The label built the building. That is the trap the whole industry was engineered on. The people who create the value do not own the value. And she, sitting inside the system, watching the mechanics of it up close for years, watching where the money entered and where it exited, watching which contracts turned into fortunes and which turned into footnotes, decided she was going to build her way out. The way out was not a lawsuit. The way out was not a screaming match. The way out was a company. In 2008, she quietly set up a production unit. By 2010, she had turned it into a full umbrella business, and she gave it a name that most fans still do not fully understand. Parkwood Entertainment. Named after a street in Houston where she once lived, back before the world knew her name. The naming was almost private, almost personal, and that was the point. She was building something for herself, and she wanted the walls to remember where she came from. She said plainly that she wanted to manage her own career instead of handing her career and her earnings to an outside operator. She wanted to follow the path of the artists who had built their own empires rather than sharing their success with someone else's. What she actually built was not a vanity project. It was a fully vertically integrated operating company. Parkwood houses music production, artist management, film and video production, tour operations, brand licensing, and creative direction under one roof. It runs its own studios, its own editing suites, and its own archive. It develops other artists. It negotiates its own deals. It controls its own catalog. It is not a label with Beyonce's name on the door. It is an operating business that Beyonce owns. Understand what vertical integration does to the economics, because this is the moment the entire equation flips. In the traditional model, an artist pays a manager, pays a label, pays a production company, pays a merchandising partner, pays a tour promoter, and each of those companies takes its cut before the artist sees anything. Parkwood collapses those layers into one entity. Every middleman fee that used to walk out of the building now stays inside it. Every dollar that used to be split with a partner is now retained by the owner. And the owner is Beyonce. This is the equity stack model at its cleanest expression. The path to durable wealth almost never runs through a bigger paycheck. It runs through the structures the paycheck flows into. She did not just want a larger royalty. She wanted the company that collected the royalty. And once she had the company, she used it to fix the one thing the label era had taken from her. This is the moment the entire equation flips a second time. Beginning with her self-titled visual album in 2013, she started releasing her music through Parkwood Entertainment. From that record forward, the ownership picture is not just different, it is inverted. The self-titled album, Lemonade, Renaissance, and Cowboy Carter were all Parkwood releases. Rather than handing the masters to a label the way she had at the start of her career, Parkwood holds and controls them. The label's role shrank to distribution. And that distinction sounds small on the surface, but financially, it is the difference between renting your career and owning it. Because when you own the master and you merely license distribution, the relationship inverts. The distributor now works for you. You pay them a fee to move the product, and you keep the underlying asset. Every stream on Spotify, every play on Apple Music, every sync placement in a film, a series, or an advertisement, every reissue, every anniversary re-release, every deluxe edition, every remix. Every piece of monetization flows back through your company rather than someone else's. Forbes has said it directly. A huge share of Beyonce's fortune traces to the fact that she owns and controls the rights to the catalog she has built since 2013. A catalog now estimated to be worth hundreds of millions of dollars on its own, without touching the touring, the branding, or anything else. And here is what makes a master such a uniquely dangerous asset to give away. Long after an album stops charting, the master keeps working. It keeps generating streaming income. It keeps generating radio royalties. It keeps generating sync fees when a director drops a Beyonce song into the opening scene of a film, when a brand licenses a Beyonce hook for a commercial, when a video game builds a soundtrack, when a fashion show scores a runway. For a catalog with Beyoncé's cultural weight, those placements can command extraordinary sums for decades. Owning the master means owning that entire future stream of income, forever, in every form it will ever take. Renting the master means missing all of it. In January 2020, Beyoncé pushed the structure even further with a global deal with Sony Music covering her broader body of work. The specific terms of that agreement were never made public, but the direction of travel across her career is unmistakable. She has spent 20 years walking away from the position where the label owned her recordings and toward the position where she owns the company that owns the recordings. Assets appreciate. Paychecks expire. The early albums pay her a share. The Parkwood albums pay her the majority. And they keep paying because a master is not a salary. A master is an asset that compounds. And the same principle that reshaped her music was about to reshape the biggest engine in her entire business. If the masters are the foundation, the tour is where the architecture actually prints money. In 2023, Beyoncé's Renaissance World Tour grossed roughly $579 million across 56 shows, pulling more than 2.7 million fans through gates around the world. Billboard called it the highest-grossing tour by a female artist at the time. 2 years later, the Cowboy Carter tour added an estimated $400 million, and that was across only 32 dates, with tens of millions more layered on top through merchandise. The Renaissance tour was so large it started showing up in national economic reports, with analysts observing measurable spikes in hotel bookings, restaurant traffic, and local spending anywhere the tour landed. The press eventually gave it a name, the Beyoncé Surge, because you could see it on the balance sheets of entire cities. That is the kind of demand almost no artist alive can generate. And Beyoncé had spent a decade building the structure to capture the value of that demand directly, instead of leaking it out to a chain of promoters. Now track her next move, because this is the part the ticket stub will never explain to you. For most artists, a tour is not run by the artist. It is run by an external promoter, a rigging company, a production designer, a merchandise partner, a travel operator, and each of those entities takes a slice of the gross before the artist sees a check. It is another version of the label problem, only wearing a different costume. For her, Parkwood runs the production itself, which means the massive portion of that revenue that usually leaks out to third parties stays inside the company she owns. Combine 2 touring cycles that grossed nearly $1 billion in under 3 years with a production apparatus that captures the margin instead of surrendering it, and you can start to see how a fortune compounds at this velocity. Forbes and industry analysts have estimated that she personally earned in the range of $148 million in a single year before taxes, one of the highest single-year figures in all of music. Not because she toured harder than anyone else, but because she toured through a company she owned. This is the second law of the equity stack model. Operating businesses with recurring, repeatable revenue outperform endorsement deals every time. A tour run through your own production company is not a one-time payday. It is a recurring, high-margin operating business. And she owns the entire apparatus. Now, before we go further, notice the pattern hiding in plain sight. The whole lesson of Beyoncé's ascent is that the people who win are the ones who own their distribution instead of renting it. And that lesson does not only apply to billionaires with stadium tours. Every creator on the internet is one algorithm change away from losing their entire audience overnight, because the audience does not actually belong to them. It belongs to the platform. The one channel that no platform can take away from a creator is the direct one. The audience that lives on the creator's own list, on the creator's own email, on the creator's own terms. That is the same lesson she applied to her masters. Own the pipe, or rent your future. Sit with that for a second, then let's go back to the architecture. Because the clearest proof that the structure, not the songs, is the real asset does not come from her wins. It comes from the one venture where the numbers did not cooperate. In 2016, Beyoncé partnered with Adidas to relaunch Ivy Park, her athleisure brand. It climbed at first, then it stalled. According to reporting in the Wall Street Journal, Ivy Park sales eventually fell to around $40 million a year, far below the roughly $250 million target Adidas had set for the partnership. Reports pointed to creative disagreements over how the brand should be positioned and operated. In early 2024, the deal ended. On the surface, That looks like a failure. A celebrity brand that missed its numbers and shut down its highest profile partnership. In almost every other celebrity story, that is where the chapter ends. Because in almost every celebrity brand deal, the corporate partner owns the intellectual property, the trademarks, the design system, and the customer data. When the venture collapses, the celebrity walks away with a bruised reputation and, materially, nothing. But she had already solved for that outcome years earlier. In 2018, Parkwood had taken full ownership of the Ivy Park brand itself. So when the Adidas partnership dissolved, the intellectual property did not vanish into a corporate parent. It stayed inside Parkwood. There was no fire sale. There was no loss of control. Because the asset was hers. And then she redeployed. She launched Noir, a fragrance line. She launched Secret with her mother, a hair care brand that industry estimates suggest has already grown into a 9-figure revenue business. She launched Sir Davis Whiskey with Moët Hennessy. The same structure that protected her when Ivy Park stalled became the launchpad for everything that came after. That is what ownership actually buys you. Not a guarantee that every venture is a win, but the certainty that when one venture does not work, you still hold the assets underneath it, and you get to try again. There is a portfolio logic sitting inside this pattern that most people miss. Music, live touring, beauty, and spirits are almost completely uncorrelated categories. When one softens, another can carry the weight. When streaming plateaus, touring surges. When one brand stalls, another scales. That is not luck. That is diversification across uncorrelated assets, held inside a single ownership stack that she controls. She has spent the last 10 years quietly assembling exactly that kind of empire, and almost all of the coverage of her fortune has been too dazzled by the stage to see the ledger. So here is the structural reveal, delivered plainly, because the popular version of this story gets the moral almost exactly backwards. The popular version says Beyonce is rich because she is one of the greatest performers alive, and she is. But talent alone does not explain the $1 billion, because Beyonce was already one of the greatest performers alive during the years she did not own her masters. The talent was constant. The voice was constant. The work ethic was constant. What changed was the structure. Beyonce did not become a billionaire by making music. Beyonce became a billionaire by owning the company that owns the music, the tours, the merchandise, the branding, and every future dollar that any of those things will ever generate. Her own early catalog is the control case that proves it. Those albums were enormous. And on the master side, they built equity for a label, not for her. The Parkwood albums, released through a company she controls, build equity for her. Same artist. Same voice. Same fan base. Two completely different financial outcomes, decided entirely by who owned the paperwork. Assets appreciate. Paychecks expire. A label-era royalty is a share of something someone else owns. A Parkwood master is an asset that appreciates, that can be licensed, that can be borrowed against, that can be passed to her children. When Forbes finally slotted Beyonce into the billionaire ranks in December 2025, the majority of that number did not come from fees she was paid. It came from assets she controls. That is the blueprint. Beyonce stopped renting herself to the industry and started owning the structure the industry had to pay. And once you see the blueprint clearly, you start seeing it everywhere in music, because Beyonce is not the only artist who found the door. She is just the one who walked through it furthest. Taylor Swift fought a public war over the ownership of her masters, lost the original recordings to a private equity buyer, and then re-recorded her entire catalog so she would finally own the versions of her own songs that mattered commercially. Justin Bieber took the opposite path, selling the rights to his catalog to a music investment firm for a reported 9-figure lump sum, trading a compounding asset for a single check today. 50 Cent turned down a flat endorsement fee from Vitamin Water and demanded an equity stake in the parent company instead, then walked away with a fortune when the company was later sold to Coca-Cola. One artist fought to reclaim the asset. One artist sold the asset. One artist demanded ownership from the first handshake. Every one of those stories rests on the same law. Equity participation is more durable than fee-based compensation. The people who build lasting wealth in music are not the ones who get the biggest checks. They are the ones who own the thing the checks are attached to. Beyonce simply built the most complete version of that model that the industry has ever seen. Beyonce did not just fight for her masters. Beyonce did not just negotiate an equity stake. Beyonce built the entire company that holds all of it, the same way her husband built Roc Nation to own the platform rather than perform on someone else's. Beyonce is not the exception to the ownership pattern. Beyonce is the pattern executed to its furthest possible expression. So the next time you see an artist smiling in a headline about a record-breaking record deal, ignore the number in the caption and ask a different question. Ask who owns the master when the music stops charting. Because that number, the one nobody in the press release wants to talk about, is the only one that decides whether the career becomes a dynasty or ends the moment the work does. Beyonce did not own the songs that made her famous. So Beyonce built the company that would own everything that came after them. The early albums made her a star. The structure made her a billionaire. And in the end, the artist who owns the machine is the one who gets to keep the music.